congratulations on such a fantastic film. I've had a chance to sit down and watch it, and I have to say it is absolutely amazing. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so great. I just love it when people resonate with it and get it.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
I guess that leads to my first question. What How difficult was the decision for you to make a documentary about your mother's work, and when did that start for you? When did you make that decision to make the documentary?
Yes. Well, it was a very difficult decision in as much as I didn't want to make a film about my mother. I actually wanted to make a different film in the beginning, like a kind of intellectual, a philosophical film about death, as it happens. And in the process, my producer said, "Oh, why don't you just go off and do some writing?" And in that process, the story of my mum's death came out, just basically fell onto the page, and it's this kind of, you've seen the film, it's this kind of weird, uncanny story about her death. And then when we were, going around trying to, talk to people about the film, they were much more interested in that story and in my mum's life than any, philosophical inquiry into death. And so, reluctantly, I have to say, at first, I realised that this was where the story was, and then it developed from there, really.
So, how did you go back to do the research right back into your mum's career? I know that you used a lot of letters and things like that, but what was that like for you taking that journey and going back over your mother's journey?
It was amazing, actually, because, these days everything's digital, but back then, there were camera negatives, there were prints, there were letters, there were documents, and it was this trove of archival material that I hadn't really looked into. And once we started to make the film, I was, just had to go through it all. I had to get to the bottom of it. I was trying to figure out my parents' relationship, for example, like why on earth did they get together? That was so different, and what actually happened with their film company. And I just found this amazing material, stuff I'd never seen before, and it was a real eye-opener into both of my parents, and it gave me a lot more understanding about their lives and what made them tick, and helped me to kind of put pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together around a story that before then had been a bit kind of overwhelming and incomprehensible.
What was the most surprising find that you had when you were going through everything?
Oh, wow. I did find these negatives that my dad had taken, like he was a photographer, and they were of my parents' wedding. And there were no other photos I'd ever seen before that. It was actually the wedding after party. And my God, the faces on, the looks on the people's faces, like my grandparents and my mother, and then someone got the camera and took a picture of my dad. They just told the story so perfectly, like my grandparents' discomfort at this weird wedding. My mother's, she really didn't want to get married, so her discomfort. And my dad, kind of like this hapless guy who just, won a lotto. That was amazing, and I had no idea that any photos existed before then.
Wow, wow. And of course, when you were sitting down and watching your mother's work, you would not only be watching that as a daughter, but watching it as a fellow filmmaker as well. What was it like kind of watching those films through both sets of eyes?
Yeah, great question. Look, it's such a range of work. She made over 40 films starting from 1957 up until, near when she passed away. And there's a lot of breadth. And I think, like a lot of them are bread and butter documentaries. They're industrial documentaries for sheep farming and rice growing and, iron ore mining, a lot of mining films. So, in terms of those films, they are extremely well made, and that's something that I really respected about her. They're no big works of art and they're not experimental, but, gee, she put her heart and soul into them. And then there's a few personal films, and I guess the standout one for me is called This Is Their Land, and it's what we believe is the first land rights film ever made in Australia, and it documents this walk for Aboriginal education from Australia Square in Sydney to La Perouse. But Mum made it into this, she wrote a song called Give Them Back Their Land, and it was unequivocally calling out white Australia and saying, hey, these people want their land back, let's give it to them. And look, she didn't really, I don't think she realised what a historic milestone that was during her life, but I feel really proud of it, actually, and proud of her for actually making this thing just without even thinking about it.
That sounds like such an important documentary. Is that something that you would consider screening somewhere like the like Acme here in Melbourne or at the National Sound and Film Archive in Canberra?
Yeah, I would love to, because I just think it would give people such insight into that era, that filmmaking era, but also the politics of the time. And my parents were pretty left wing for the time, and it's kind of like a cute. It's a little bit patronising, but not too much. But that's part of the films of the time, and I think it would be great for people to have access to this little slice of Australian history and of Australian activism.
Definitely. And talking of politics, how did you feel when you were discovering about the hostility that your mother felt in the industry? I know for myself, I've been through that when I found out things from my mother's past about how she was treated as a young girl growing up in Tasmania. How did that hit you when you found out about that hostility, and what kind of an emotional journey did that take you on?
Yeah, it's I guess it's taken me, I don't know if you have this experience, but when you're a kid, you just, whatever your parents do, you just think it's bloody normal. You don't think it's exceptional. It's just like, yeah, they're filmmakers, so what?
Yeah.
So at first, it gave me this real appreciation of what she had achieved. It helped me to see her from another angle and really respect her. She had this real can-do attitude, and she wasn't kind of beaten down by the sexism in the industry. And so I feel kind of, good on you for that. But I also do feel a little sad as well, because I know that she wrote a feature film script that she would have loved to have made. And, just because she was a woman, she just didn't get the chance to make it. And the other thing, which makes me feel quite sad actually, is that, the one of the ways she got to make so many films was to join up with her husband, my father, Norman Castle. And he was the front man. Like, if she didn't have him, then she wouldn't have been able to get all these films to make. But the flip side of that is that she was stuck in this pretty destructive marriage and business venture for about 13 years. And, it really ground her down over the years. And look, if the culture had been different, had been less kind of misogynistic and sexist at that time, I think she would have been much more happy and more effective in her career woman. So yeah, it's a bit tough, but I appreciate her bravery more too now.
Definitely. And as a filmmaker, what did you learn going back over your mother's work? Was there anything in there, like we all sit down and watch other directors' work, and we all learn from it. Was there something that you learnt from your mother's work now that you're going to put into your own films?
I think the visuals, because my mum wanted to be a cinematographer at first, and she shot her first film, this beautiful film called The Beach, in 1957, and the black and white is spectacular. The whites are clean and clear, and the blacks are crisp, and she captures the light bouncing off the water so beautifully. And when I came to be a cinematographer, I learned directly from her. In fact, she taught me how to see in black and white. So I guess it's no surprise that I actually became a cinematographer. And I think that's the biggest influence. And she had this lovely, quite strong aesthetic, which I can see has transferred to my own work. And I guess the other thing she gave me was this resilience. Like, she really taught me how to deal with the blokes. You know, if you're going to be a director of photography on set, you've got a whole crew that's working for you, focus pullers and grips and gaffers. And she really taught me how to earn their respect in order to get them on side to help me do what I needed to do, and to not be kind of bullied. You know, there's always a couple of bullies that come along in a career. But, yeah, she just taught me that pragmatic way of just kind of forging ahead and not getting beaten down by it.
Definitely. Now, of course, the film had its world premiere at the Sydney Film Festival. How do you feel now that the film is going to get a wider release in cinemas? Are you excited that the story will be shared with so many more people, or are you a little bit nervous?
A bit of both. Like, I'm totally rapt that the film's getting out there. You know, it took us more than 8 years to make, so it's a real labour of love. And of course, you make films to be seen, but the flip side of that is that it's a very personal film, and I make myself quite vulnerable in the film, and I reveal some tricky stuff about myself and my relationship with my mother. So that is a little bit, quite a lot, excruciating. And, but, you know, I think, what was I thinking? Like, you idiot, why did you feel like you had to do that? But, you know, it's out there, and also, like, I have had the experience of people really relating, because it is very honest film. I find that audience members really often resonate with things in my life. They go, oh, that happened to me too, or that really reminded me of this and it triggered this in me. So I do know it's a film of transformation, particularly for anyone who's had a bit of a rough time, you know, some trauma, or is doing some healing work. So that, I think there's some great potential, you know, with the film, and I really look forward to see how it travels through the world when we kind of release it from its cage.
Definitely. Well, I can't wait to be able to tell more people to go along and see this film. But what would you like to say to anybody out there who was thinking about heading along to check out When the Camera Stopped Rolling in cinemas?
I just say, keep an open mind. Just sit down and allow yourself to be taken away by this film on many levels, visual, oral, the narrative, because it's a film you want to see in a cinema. It's a very visceral piece of work, and it's quite affecting emotionally. And maybe bring a couple of tissues or a hanky, and also bring your friends, because we'd love to have it screened to as many people as possible.